Hi, and welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Allison Ferch. I'm the Executive Director at the Globalization and Localization Association, otherwise known as GALA. I'm in Seattle, Washington in the US today. So that means it's morning for me, and I hope you'll give me a little grace since I've only had one cup of coffee so far. Today, I am joined by three amazing leaders. We have Jeannette Stewart, we have Aimee Ansari, and we have Kania. They are going to introduce themselves in just a moment. We're gathered today to talk about the impact of the pandemic on NGOs and nonprofit organizations that are operating within the translation and localization industry. Like many small businesses and large businesses for that matter, our organizations have been impacted in predictable and surprising ways. And we're going to share a little bit about that with you today. And I hope that you'll bring some questions. I'd like to start out with introductions. Jeannette, would you mind starting us off and share a little bit about your own background and also the organization that you're running?
Thanks, Allison, and a great thank you to the organizers and the host for giving us all this opportunity to share our stories with you. So Translation Commons is serving language professionals. We are a volunteer community sharing knowledge and creating a roadmap for a digital ecosystem where all languages have equal access and speakers can pursue the same opportunities digitally. So on our platform, you can learn new skills from free tools and courses. You can collaborate in working groups. And we are a social civil society partner to UNESCO's International Year of Indigenous Languages. And we are now working with them to create an action plan for the International Decade of Indigenous Languages.
Thanks, Jeannette. Maria, how about you?
Sure. So my name is Kania. I am, and I'll just introduce myself with other information apart from Women in Localization. So I'm an account director within Translations.com. And my role at Women in Localization is to be a sponsorship director right now, program director. And to describe a little bit more about what we do in Women in Localization, I think a lot of you already know us. Hopefully, if you don't, then obviously I'll be able to give you a little bit more information. So we're here to foster global community for the advancement of women and the localization industry. We've been around for about 11 years, but we are a baby non-for-profit because we've only been non-for-profit for about a year. But we've grown quite a bit, I have to say, in the last few years. So we have 24 chapters worldwide in different countries. I encourage you to go to our website and check it out. We are over 5,000 of global members. We have 11 different programs that help to foster this global community worldwide. And we have over 60 volunteers, and this number is growing basically on a daily basis. So that's us kind of in a nutshell. Me personally, I'm based in Barcelona in Spain, and I'm Polish Canadian. I've been with the organization for over 5 years, and I've held different roles. I've started the chapter, I've opened the chapter here in Barcelona for Catalonia 5 years ago, and later on, I was responsible for chapters growth within the EMEA region. So that's me.
Thanks, Maria. Aimee, can you tell us a little bit about you and Translators Without Borders?
Sure. Thanks very much. And thanks to the organizers for organizing this. It's an incredible opportunity. Really appreciate it. And really happy to be here with these three amazing other women on this panel. Translators Without Borders, many of you, I hope, will have heard of us. We are a nonprofit organization that seeks a world where knowledge knows no language barriers. So a lot of the work we do is with nonprofit organizations in all over the world, really, but mostly in Africa, Asia, South America, some in Europe and in America, in North America as well, in Australia. But what we do is we try to get life-saving, life-critical information into languages that when people speak those languages, it makes them vulnerable. So we think of language as a way that is sometimes used in countries to further people's vulnerability and marginalization. I personally come from the humanitarian and development world. I've been at Translators Without Borders, my dream job, for the last 4 years, and have learned a ton about languages and translation. And really, we've been able in the last 4 years to expand and grow the organization quite a lot. So now we have country offices in Bangladesh, Nigeria, and DRC, and we are doing a lot of work. We should pass 3 million words of translations related to COVID in over 100 languages Wednesday-ish.
That's fantastic. Thank you, ladies, for the introductions. Before we get into the first question, what I'll ask of you is that if at any point it would help for you to give some context, please do. So for example, this next question that we're going to address, it might be helpful if you talk about some of the projects, specific projects that your organizations are working on, just to give a little context to the question. But first up, I would like to know, or the group would like to know, how has the pandemic affected the people within your organization? So that could be staff members, your volunteers, your teams. And like I said, if it helps to give some project examples as you answer this, please do. Let's go ahead with Maria. Can you start us off with that?
Sure. So obviously, some of our volunteers, they might have lost their jobs, full-time jobs and so forth. I don't think the volunteers themselves were affected. I know for a fact that a lot of our members were affected, either losses of jobs or certain cuts and so forth. So we're very much aware of that. And we are trying to help out in any way possible. We have certain programs that are in place already, but right now we know that these programs, are working at a maximum capacity, and we're trying to do even more. So what kind of things are we able to do for our members, for the volunteers who are working with us, regarding the job losses? So we have a wonderful job board where for free, you can place your job announcements and so forth. We also provide we write articles and different blogs, how to update your CV in the time of crisis. Or we have, a lot of different women submitting articles about how to work at home during this, these crazy times where you have children, running around and, your internet fails and so forth. So a lot of different things to basically support our members or our volunteers to help them find their way around all of this. The other thing as well is, for example, we also have a mentorship program, and this is great because basically right now we're trying to advertise this even more so during the times that people are losing jobs and then feeling a little bit shaky with their current jobs. So if anybody can become a mentor. You don't have to be a member. Women, men, whoever feels like they have something to contribute, you can become a mentor. And then we have a lot of mentees who are looking for somebody to help them out, walk them through things. And this could be as much time as you can give or as little time as you can give. If it's only a few sessions, that's already something. We're very appreciative of that. So that's another thing. We also do chapter events that are obviously not happening right now, but maybe I can talk about that later.
Okay, thanks, Maria. Jeannette, can you talk about how your teams or volunteers or staff have been impacted by the pandemic?
Yeah, so we're very lucky because the impact actually has been positive for us in growth. We have a lot more volunteers. Some of our groups have increased from 10 members to 35 members. And we've seen a much tightly knit community sense and spirit. Our culture is amazing because everybody's stepping in to help each other. So very few of our volunteers have been affected professionally. So we're trying to help them as much as we can, through our network, providing any clues for, possible jobs, exactly the same as women in localization, anything we can support. Also, we have a lot of volunteers who are telling us that during this time, if they didn't have the productive way of funneling their energy to, the common good and a common cause, they would be sitting alone and worrying and being stressed out in the house. So we're actually helping them to, overcome the various anxieties that are caused by the effects of this pandemic. And we also have a lot of students and young graduates who just graduated. And whereas before they all counted on going on to internships, these internships have dried out. There's so few internships right now, and most of them are internships that were created prior to pandemic. Since the pandemic started, everything has been in lockdown when it comes to internships. So we are able to provide them a more meaningful package where they can, get more valuable experience, which is going to be very relevant to their career paths. And of course, we do a lot of mentoring with our more experienced people. But overall, the growth of our volunteerism has created a new energy for Translation Commons. And with fewer people, you do less things. Now we have a lot more people, we can do a lot more things. And this is very encouraging for all the volunteers that join us, because they actually feel as if they're doing something which is for the better good.
It's nice to hear of examples where there is truly a benefit coming from this. I know sometimes I'll put a positive spin on a challenge, but that's well and truly a benefit for Translation Commons. Good. Aimee, how about TWB?
Well, Translators Without Borders, we are sort of any major disaster, particularly a health outbreak, a disease outbreak like this, sort of what we were made to do. Sadly, while other people suffer, we have a lot of work to do. We are very, very busy. So as Jeannette said, a huge increase in outpouring of support and volunteers, which is great. And if any of you are volunteering, please understand we've had about 20,000 signups in the last 3 months. So struggling to manage that, but really appreciate it. And we've seen a huge increase in the number of hours, and the number of people, and the number of languages. In terms of our teams, when your workload is increasing like that so quickly, and you're also having to deal with your kids at home and your family at home, your partner at home, working from home is not the same working from home as it was before. Translators Without Borders has always been a dispersed organization. This has become a different kind of thing. So we've had to do things, we've listened to our teams basically, and our volunteers, and what can we do to make it work for you? So a lot more flexible working hours. We have a volunteer scheme within the organization, so that I have a little bit of time to read stories to some of the kids of the staff members. So I read stories, We've done all kinds of things like that. Some of our team members are counselors, so there's been some counseling. And then, of course, we've had I mentioned the country offices before in Congo, Nigeria, and Bangladesh. We've had to evacuate those. So at the very beginning of the crisis, that was just a whole lot of stress of trying to get people out of crazy countries on like the last flights out and things. So it's been quite a time for us. And within this, of course, there is opportunity that comes from this. Suddenly people really understand why communications are so important and why it's important to have information in people's languages. So we've spent a lot more time educating the humanitarian world in particular about language technology and pivot languages and cat tools and that sort of thing, because suddenly they really do need to know about it. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Thank you. So next question, we can divide it into 2 or 3 parts. What I'd like to ask is if the pandemic has led to any changes in the kind of work that you do, and has it increased your workload at all? And then possibly as an add-on question to that, well, let's just start there. We'll do this one before we head to the next ones. But yeah, changing in the nature of your work or in the volume of your work. Jeannette, let's start with you.
Sure, of course it has changed. And because we are serving the language professionals, we are also making sure that all the languages have equal digital footprint. And that means that information which is digitally available for COVID-19 should be available in every single language in the world. And that is not possible, as we know, because we have certain dominant commercially driven languages, and the rest are marginalized. As a result, people in various corners of the world that speak languages sometimes without a script, they do not get this information. So for us, this has been always a very important aspect of our mission, that all languages are equal, should be equal, and especially should have the same digital opportunities. Speakers should have the same information that is available for all languages. So in that effect, our mission has not changed, but our mission now is a lot more focused on the specific pandemic and the effect that it has had on these marginalized, underrepresented languages and communities in the world who are the most vulnerable. Because without information, the speakers of an advanced age, who are the main speakers of the language, are more at risk. And if these speakers are unfortunately affected by coronavirus, then the actual language suffers and it can get extinct. So for us, it was very vital to bring out some basic information to some of these communities that, we were the only ones reaching out to them. So in that effect, yes, we have focused our energies towards that. At the same time, being language professionals, we know that we have a workflow that facilitates communication, information, and the general flow of language, both digitally and in the world. So we found an organization found us where we partnered. They are called Open Source Medical Supplies. They just started the organization in March 2020. And it was a movement, basically the makers movement, which got together and said, when we know that the medical supplies are going to be all depleted, we need to step in and create those medical supplies in all the local countries that will need them. And they appealed through pros.com, I believe, and had something like 800 translators reach out and say, yes, I will help you. And it was quite a bit, as we know from Translators Without Borders, it is very difficult to manage. So we are stepping in and helping them to do project management. So we're taking those guides that they have created of medical supplies and helping them to use all the translators that have come through and localize them. Because as we know, each country will have different compliances, and each country will have different ability to source out the ingredients and resources that are needed and the material. So there is a heavy localization, and we're the experts, the language professionals in our industry. So we pull together quite a small team at the moment, which is the core team, and growing it as we are getting more and more languages. Because at the moment, we're starting with 15, 20 languages, but we're moving on to have up to 70 or 80 languages, whatever we can do as quickly as we can. And also working with local teams in many countries from the makers movement, that they are waiting for this guide so they can start creating the medical supplies. So we feel a great sense of accomplishment being able to not just have our words used, but also to see the impact of these translations, of the project management, of the facilitation of another organization that is actually on the ground. So all our team is fascinated of being able to help in such a meaningful and impactful way.
Mm-hmm. Good. Aimee, I suppose it probably goes without saying that your workload has increased. So if that's a given, and maybe it's not, but if it is, maybe you could address your comments to the changing nature of your work. I remember when we were preparing for this, you talked about a renewed interest in machine translation, for example. So maybe you can talk about the changing nature of the work or the volumes.
Well, the volume is through the roof. It's craziness. So yeah, volume is, I mean, it's interesting because the volume has overall increased, but in some places it's decreased, and in other places it's increased quite a lot. But the work that we've been focused on at the beginning of the crisis was social media monitoring. So we had translators who were monitoring social media, spotting keywords, spotting misinformation, and working with teams of other people around the world to do the same monitoring, aggregating that data up, getting the answers, translating the responses, the real information, or so, does rice water cure COVID? So spotting all of that. Once we've now gotten to a point where most of our major partner organizations, BBC Media Action, all those kinds of organizations now have a much better sense of how to do that multilingually. So we don't have to do that anymore, which is great. So we're focusing a lot more on the translation, but also building the language technology. So as you say, Allison, with all of this, like huge amounts of data coming in different languages, the need to at least get some basic translations out, even if it's machine translation in Bangla, which isn't great. And then having the professional translators work on what is the appropriate response to that, what is the science and the research, what would WHO say, what would the Red Cross say? So they're working on that. We're also doing some work to make sure that frontline health workers can get information on COVID in their languages. So we're working in 8 languages right now: Hausa, Kanuri, I'm going to forget some, so I'm going to stop there. But Bangla and Burmese and Congolese, Swahili and Lingala, to develop animations and videos for the less literate populations, and some online courses for some of the sort of management level people in health facilities around the world. And then we're also working with the Red Cross to develop a very advanced form of chatbot. Sort of, we've all seen the chatbots you have. For me, it's my telephone company has this chatbot that drives me nuts because it doesn't sound like a human. But we're starting to develop some of those for the Red Cross societies around the world, so that people can start engaging with those and asking questions and getting good information in their languages. You might know that that really good chatbots right now only really exist in English, French, Spanish. So we're starting to develop them in some of the more marginalized languages where there is where there's good enough internet penetration, and at least some basic literacy. We can do it via SMS as well, where there's no smartphone or literacy is really a problem.
Great, great. Maria, you alluded to it already, you know, maybe the changing nature of the content that Women in Localization is producing, or maybe the mentorship opportunities. Can you elaborate on it, on any of the projects, or maybe what's been discussed, you know, at the board meetings and whatnot about the changing nature of your work during this time?
Sure. So maybe, you know what, let me just start with something that I think is quite important within our organization. As you know, we are 24 chapters worldwide, and they're physical chapters. So we have a chapter in Italy, and we have a chapter in the UK, and so forth, in Germany. So each of these chapters organize normally events, local events, right? And it could be anywhere from 30 people to 150 people in really popular locations like San Francisco and LA. Obviously, we're not able to do that anymore, and that was something that, you know, that's a lot of networking. There's a lot of exchange of ideas, a lot of excitement, and so forth. So we're not able to do that anymore, but we continue to do online events. We'd like to do more, but the ones that we do, I find that it's extremely amazing that you're able to join, for example, an event in India. If you want to find out what they're talking about, you know, what's happening over there, if you're thinking about a job change, or if you're just trying to, you know, meet other people, this is a really great opportunity. We had an event, we had a chapter opening in Italy recently, so a lot more people joined than normally, you know. So we, and the UK chapter, for example, doing a lot of really exciting things. So there is a lot of opportunities for our for different members from around the world to join in events that normally they would not be able to join. So that, I think, is a positive side. Obviously, not being able to meet physically, this is what it is, and we have to deal with it. But I think there's still a lot of opportunities otherwise for all of us. In terms of content, I think, you know, what I've mentioned, you know, definitely we are focusing a little bit more about how to help people recover their job posts, and how to, you know, maybe improve their CVs and so forth. So there's a lot of focus on that. And as I've mentioned before as well, mentorship, I think that's an exciting one. And everybody really benefits from that as well. Internally also for our volunteers, which is something that I forgot to mention before, we have, as I said, about 60 plus volunteers. So we've been organizing, the board of directors has been organizing these webinars to help us also through this period. And they're really inspiring. For example, how to create webinars, you know, if you have to in your job right now because you're not able to meet, how do you do that? One is coming up soon. Or how to develop your personal brand. So they've been totally, you know, and totally inspiring. And people who work for large organizations said that they really get a lot out of that. So these are the sort of things that we're doing. I'm probably forgetting a few others, but we haven't stopped. It just had to switch a little bit. It had to change the nature. We had to change the nature a little bit. Obviously, we're looking forward to having face-to-face meetings eventually.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that sort of trade-off between globalization and hyper-localization with your chapters, because they're now benefiting from the virtual platform and becoming more global. And yet what we probably cherish about them at times is their localness. Thank you for sharing that.
Indeed, yes.
I've got a fairly easy one. Well, it's a difficult challenge, but it's an easy question. And that is, how has the pandemic impacted your organization's finances? Maria, shall we continue with you?
Sure, why not? So I'll be honest with you, it has not impacted us that much. I'm very happy to say, and we're so thankful to our sponsors, because really the only way we get our money is from our sponsors. We don't have any other venues. So, you know, I'm responsible for the sponsorship program, and I'm very happy to say that a lot of our previous sponsors came back, renewed their sponsorship commitments, and there's a lot of interest in our organization. That it's wonderful to see that we have a waiting list of companies who want to sponsor us. We're obviously not asking also for a lot. We're not an organization that needs a lot of money, but whatever we can get we're absolutely thrilled. So it hasn't affected us yet. I'm hoping that it will, will continue. There's been a few companies, obviously, that were not able maybe to commit, but in general, I have to say we're very lucky and we're doing okay in that sense.
Good, good. Aimee, what about Translators Without Borders?
It's hard to say right now. A lot of so we have 3 different income streams. One of them is the localization industry, and that's probably our most important income stream for a number of different reasons. And we've been very, very lucky this year so far. For the emergency response for the COVID pandemic, RWS, Moravia, We Localize, and Smartling all stepped up and gave us a little bit of seed money so we could get going before some of the institutional grants kicked in. I'm extremely grateful to them for that. And so then we've been working on grants from the British government, the US government, some of the big institutional donors. And then we get a little bit of funding, and this is super, super important from individuals and the public. Most of that funding comes in at the end of the year, of course, around the holiday season. So we don't know how we're going to be affected. I hope not at all, because the work we're doing is really, really important and helps a lot of people, millions of people. And also we hope that it helps to grow capacity within the industry as well. So it's hard to say right now, but
yeah,
we're hopeful.
Yeah, it's early days. Jeannette, what about Translation Commons? I think that you also may have some trickle down impact from some of your funding sources.
So first of all, Translation Commons model is a volunteer model. And as a result of that, we have built everything based on volunteers offering and doing most of the work. So there are always, various expenses, but we're rather in the same situation with women in localization. We have very little expenses. And with the exception of our platform, which needs to be maintained and it is being donated by various engineers, we tend to have very little needs. However, as we know, when we're growing and with many more volunteers coming through, the needs change. And we always had a little bit of funding to take care of these expenses, and we still do. The same donors are able to continue donating. And it is mostly individuals because our platform benefits individuals mostly. We don't work with organizations. And although we have a huge program, the Language Digitization Initiative, which serves Indigenous communities, and we work with UNESCO, and we have a lot of work going up there. However, when it comes to the actual community, the platform, and the work that we do, it is for individuals. It is for students, for professors, for translators to learn more skills. So everything we offer on the platform is free for their benefit. As a result, people are very appreciative for the opportunities that they get. Even our internship programs, which are not actually strictly internship because they fall under our talent management, our volunteer management, even these are designed to get to train young professionals in program management, in project management, to train them with translators who then get mentored by other experienced translators so they can start having specializations. So everything is geared for the benefit of our users and members. And that's why perhaps we have such an appeal for the individuals to offer, small amounts, exactly the same as all our organizations.
Okay, thank you. So we're about halfway through. Keep the questions coming, please. I'd like to move to the next question, which has to do with some of the sources of your work. And we're curious, how much work do you do with governments, for governments? Do you receive a lot of requests from governments for help? And yes, would you consider yourself partners during this pandemic period, or maybe before? And again, if it helps to provide context, you can describe some of the programs or projects to kind of drive it home with an example. Aimee, let's start with you.
Thanks. So we do not work directly with governments right now. Very rarely. We will work with some municipalities or some counties and things to get information out. What we generally will do is work with other non-governmental organizations or with the Red Cross or the UN for various reasons. Governments are not always the easiest institutions to work with, and organizations like the UN and the Red Cross have institutional relationships with them already that makes it easier for them to, for example, make sure that if we're translating a whole bunch of information about what frontline health workers are supposed to be doing, that has to be agreed by the Ministry of Health in the country. You want to have that relationship solid, so you know what you're doing, and there's a relationship of trust there.
Yeah, Jeannette, how about at Translation Commons?
So when the coronavirus actually started getting global, it was in February. The TC leadership, including myself, we were participating at a high-level event organized by the Mexican government in Mexico City for UNESCO's declaration of the Indigenous Decade of Indigenous Languages. And we immediately started discussions with the UN. So what happens with the UN is that they have a lot of member states in UNESCO. So although we don't work directly in a partnership with these governments, everything we do is affected and taken over by various governments. So for example, the action plan that we're creating now for the decade, which we're not creating it alone, it is a multi-stakeholder partnership of many NGOs and many organizations, including the international agencies. When this action plan is going to be become available and start being implemented in 2022, it is the governments that are going to be implementing it. So in a way, we are providing advice right now of what it should be and how, you know, the decade should go. But also we come up with certain ideas that are going to be helpful because we're so much experienced in the language. So one of the things that we said while we were in Mexico City, we spoke with various officials and asked them to create a language network precisely for pandemic situations and crisis situations, but also to be able to funnel through for all the languages, all the indigenous communities. So there is no overarching language authority in the world. And we can't see anybody else more appropriate to be forming such an authority other than the UN. So our idea was very well received because it falls within the Sustainable Development Goals. We have put a proposal in, and what has happened is that through the lockdown, the actual decision-making mechanism for the UN stalled for a while, and it's only picking up now, but the various, more important and urgent things are taking, precedence. So the language network is something that we're hoping that they're going to continue because it has been very well received. So at the moment, we're working with quite a lot of nonprofits and international agencies to create this and finalize the proposal of how this could be. So there is an equality of all the nonprofits. There is information, pouring into this language network from all the sources that then can be disseminated where it's needed in the world and how it's needed. So that is one of the things that we do indirectly with governments. Yes, at the moment, I think that there will be a lot more happening when the International Decade of Indigenous Languages happens, where the action plan needs to be implemented. And at that stage, we may be working with, as an advisory consultative role towards the various local governments.
All right, thank you. Maria, I don't want to leave you out, though I think I might know the answer. Does Women in Localization work in this regard at all? My understanding is it's non-governmental, but more sort of commercially and individually driven or focused.
Precisely. But we do work with local associations, so governmental associations. Our different local chapters form some sort of relationships with them, and our members benefit from that. We also work with women's network, business networks worldwide, but it's not. I know that's not the question. But I think because we're still, like I said, a fairly new NGO. I think eventually. There might be some sort of a collaboration like that, because we definitely want to make a lot of noise about women in localization, in different countries, and make sure that there's that understanding and support. So right now, like I said, on local levels, but there may be more coming.
Okay, great. Aimee, I have a specific question that came in for you. There's two, actually. And Jeannette, the second question may also be relevant to Translation Commons. So Aimee, is there a focus like Interpreters Without Borders inside Translators Without Borders? Are you doing spoken language as well as written language?
We do a lot of spoken language, but we don't do interpretation per se. Usually what we do is support frontline aid workers, training them with interpretation skills and some of the do's and don'ts of interpretation. We also provide glossaries specifically for COVID. I think we've just launched 33 languages and some 200 terms or something. That help interpreters to be able to consistently translate some of the more complex health terminology. As far as I know, there isn't an Interpreters Without Borders. It's quite a tricky thing, the interpretation thing, when you're talking about some of the languages in which we work, the Nandes, Lingalas, Hausas. Yeah, just tricky. So no.
Okay.
Happy to support it.
Next question is about language pairs, and this was directed specifically at TWB, but Jeannette, you might like to answer this one as well. But Aimee, since it starts with TWB, have you seen the need or a real demand for specific languages or language pairs?
It changes over the course of the pandemic. So early on, it was Chinese. And a lot of Eastern languages, Vietnamese, Indonesian, so some of the other languages in Southeast Asia in particular. It's changing now. You can go to our website, to our COVID landing page, and it shows what languages are in most demand right now. But of course, most of the content is produced in English. So Spanish and French and Arabic are in high demand because we have to pivot through those to get into some of the local languages. So you always see very high Spanish, because we always have Spanish and French, because we have to go through those.
Jeannette, what about at Translation Commons? Is this a relevant question for you?
Yes, of course. We have Interpreter Commons, and it is a very, very active group. It has a core group of a few people that are managing a lot of resources and sharing. They do a lot of reports on technology, especially, the new platforms. They had started doing that 3 or 4 years ago. So they were ahead of the time, knowing that there will be a time in the future when platforms will be the way to go with interpreting. And they had been doing reports and sharing the findings of the reports with the automation providers and helping them, improve their features. So they have been very, very active on the technology side. Having said that, I want to take a moment to mention one of the most important COVID-19 projects that we have done in the last 3 months. Somehow the question didn't come for specifically this question until now that we're talking about audio. But the most important project we did is a poster maker. We partnered with Panlex, which has a lot of lexical data for over 6,000 languages. And we created an application where any of these languages can pull up a poster in the language pre-populated with any of these words that exist in the lexical data. Now, the reason we did this is because, having worked with Indigenous communities, we know that they're very sensitive about the language, information, and data. They need to be owning the data, and they want to be part of the information and communication process. So we allowed them with this application to take charge of themselves and create that information. So we had to work very carefully to make the message in such that there are terms available. So, for example, in our Aboriginals in Australia, they do not have the sense of the 2 meters. So they would say a snake's length. So we had to find the right information. So we opted for the 5 World Health Organization instruction, which is wash your hands, cough in your elbow, don't touch your face, keep distance instead of 2 meters, and stay home, and make it in such a way that it would translate in 6,000 languages. And of course, we had to be very careful with the graphics because we wanted to be all inclusive and not offend any culture. So finally, when we did come up with the 5, we put it out there for the communities, and we were, it has basically emerged into a movement because every community wanted to create their own poster. So we have now about 250 communities that have come along and created their own poster, and they're very proud of the poster in over 200 of these languages. Unfortunately, this poster is the only information on COVID-19 in their language. They have been putting it in the grocery stores. They have been sharing it in social media on a continuous basis. We have a few communities that post it every single day. And we have some groups that post the various dialects every day. And that is because of that extra need. But then again, we found out from feedback that not everybody reads and writes. And of course, we have the graphs, which may be enough, but we felt that the audio should be part of this. So we're creating on the poster a few audio buttons that you can hear the 5 instructions. So I wanted to finish with that because I think that it's extremely important to give the power to these communities to be informed in the way they want to be informed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Good. I've got a question on my end, and that I'm curious to know how your work has changed in a practical sense, either your own work, the work of your volunteers, the work of your staff. And, you know, one of the examples we discussed when we were meeting for this, I think Maria, was related to the change from in-person to virtual events, for example. But I wonder if you can talk about how your work has changed, and then also let us know if you think that's going to be something that sticks, that's enduring, or whether you think that you'll go back to some version of business as usual when we settle into kind of a different phase. Maria, let's start with you. Maria, I think we've lost your audio.
Let's see.
No,
if
still
it's
not
possible.
hearing. There you go.
Okay, maybe
Yep, good.
Okay, we've got it. Good. So I forgot to mention one important thing that I think is very valid, you know, with your question here. So we are also forming a global community. It's so you don't have to be part of a chapter to belong to this global community. I mean, it's pretty much everybody. But we're going to continue to do kind of accelerate this notion a bit more and make sure that there is, you know, online webinars, there is more of online events for everybody to join. Also, I think chapters are going to try and, you know, having had the chance to draw more audience in from outside of their countries, they're probably going to try and do more of that, and we're going to definitely encourage that so that they have more exposure and more audience. So we're definitely, you know, I think we're going to be accelerating that notion of being digital, doing more things online, having more webinars and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Good. Aimee, what about TWB?
I think, as I mentioned before, we are going a lot. are particularly in Congo, Bangladesh, and some of the local areas in which we work, we have, it has been seen as a less of a priority to create the translation memories, to create the machine translation before. Now we see with those communities, and we work in 9 languages in Northeast Nigeria, for example, and have communities around those languages. They now sort of understand the importance of some of the digital technology we've been trying to get them to use. So it's that's how it's changed, and I do think that will be lasting. They're really seeing some of the benefits of that now. And like Jeannette was saying about the snake's length, for us it's a cow's length. They'd be cow's length away.
Yeah. Jeannette, what about Translation Commons? Has there been a change in the way you execute your work, or any of the practical aspects of the work that you do?
Actually, yes, and it's because of the growth in the volunteers. The model is very solid, and what has happened is we have now so many more volunteers that are a lot more skilled in various ways, in ways that perhaps we didn't have before. So we're finding now that we are fully operational on multiple functions. But we have people that can help us with adding new features. We have people that are helping us more on the organization and our programs. For example, in our language digitization programs now, we have program managers. We have now training for program managers, so we can then have more people, young graduates, learning how to be program managers, and the same for project managers. So our training has increased because we have more skills, but also because we have a lot more people, a lot more willing to volunteer their time. We also have a much tighter structure now, and we are at the starting now to restructure the entire organization to cater for the next growth. So we're moving from a startup now to the next phase, where we're becoming more established, with people understanding what we're doing, because until recently we were always mixed up with Translators Without Borders. And now it seems that our audience and our community understands the differences clearly. So it is we are in this wonderful stage of moving to the next established evolution of Translation Commons.
Great. Thanks. Maria, how about at Women in Localization? Any enduring, lasting changes that you expect?
Well, I think what I've mentioned before, I mean, we're just going to be accelerating, with anything that's online, for sure, digital. It's just going to go faster. I think that's probably the case. We're going to do more with what we've discovered we can right now. So.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Listen, we're just about out of time. I'd like to end with one question, and I'm going to add the ability for you to kind of say your final words, your parting words at the same time. So the question is whether or not your organization offers any benefits or services to support people. And I suppose you could interpret that as your volunteers, for example, or your stakeholders. You can interpret that how you like. During this time, I think the add-on question to that for me would be, how can people support you? How can people get engaged with your organizations? And again, any final comments that you'd like to make at this time? We've got about 5 minutes at the most, I believe, left. So Maria, let's start with you.
Sure. So I'll just kind of summarize what I've mentioned before. Definitely helping each other out with jobs. So the job board, I encourage everybody to go there. Mentors, we're looking for mentors, and I know there are a lot of people out there who offer their services, and it's also a lot of fun. I have to say, you get a lot of satisfaction when you become a mentor and you see people grow. That's part of what we do in our organization. We help not just women, men, everybody grow, professionally and develop. And of course, we're always looking for sponsors. What I said before is that we are lucky to have our sponsors. We're always looking for more. There's still a few spots left for this year, so we're definitely we'll welcome any type of help.
Great, thank you. Aimee, how about Translators Without Borders? Obviously you're supporting many, many communities around the world. Are there maybe folks within, or I'd like you to interpret that question the way you wish to answer it, actually.
So we do give a lot of support to our teams, whether they're volunteers or not volunteers. So there's a lot of training opportunities, and we have a whole series of trainings on not quite as advanced as what Jeannette's doing on project management, but a very simplified version of that. As well as field interpretation and humanitarian translation specifically. What we've always really appreciated from particularly the pros.com community, but the wider translator community as a whole, is all of the support that you give us. So you like our tweets, you like our LinkedIn pages and our Facebook, you start conversations with us and within the communities. That's great. We have an emergency response fund for COVID that we started for COVID. Anything you can do to help us find sponsors or raise money for that. So Facebook fundraisers, that kind of thing. There's all kinds of really cool, interesting ideas on that. TikTok dances have been really wild recently. So yeah, we really appreciate all of that support, and we always need translators.
Yes, super. Okay, just a couple minutes left. Jeannette, how about you and Translation Commons? How would you answer that?
So Translation Commons, we're very lucky to be able to offer continuity in resumes. So a lot of people that have been affected, especially young graduates who have graduated, by volunteering with us and offering, to a part-time level, 20 hours a week, they get a title, they get a specific job description, they get the training for this, and there is a huge continuity in their resume. So in Translation Commons, we reproduce an organization. So everybody gets their email, everybody gets, their own job description, and they're able to put it on their resume. So this is a major benefit for people, but it's also the training, the skills that this is the time to learn something new. So for example, a lot of young translators, they have never been taught subtitling. So we have a free subtitling tool on our platform, and they can learn that. On the other hand, with our programs, we have a lot of communities now that they have reached out to us, and we are helping them digitize, and we're helping them with various pilots and everything we can. We get the right people, the right technical people in all the organizations, whether it is, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, wherever it is, Google, to work with them so they can have their digital presence. And when it comes to the future and what it is, I want to let everybody remember that Translation Commons is a community of language professionals. So it's for everybody who's in this call, whatever, the sector within this community. It is different from the other two organizations, but we created this community to be our community, our home. So joining, you share your gifts and talents and skills with the rest of us. So please do.
Thank you for you three for sharing your gifts and talents and skills with us today. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and I wish you all online a wonderful, beautiful day or evening. Thanks again.
Thank you, Allison. So much. Thank you so much, Allison. And thanks to Gala for all your support as well.
Translator Commons as well. Thank you.